Welcome to this episode of Automotive Insiders. I'm your host, Jason Stein. Great to have you back listening again with us. If you're an automotive supplier right now, you're likely dealing with one word more than any other: pressure. Cost pressure, contract pressure, and increasingly tariff pressure. Since 2020, the supply chain has been hit from every angle: rising material and labor costs, semiconductor shortages, geopolitical disruptions, and now a constantly shifting global trade environment. And yet many suppliers are still operating under long-term fixed price contracts that were never designed for this level of volatility. So the question becomes, how do you protect your margins when the rules keep changing? Joining me today are Vanessa Miller and Nick Ellis from Foley Lardner. They'll walk through what they call the supplier offensive playbook, how to think about contracts, where leverage actually exists, and how suppliers can proactively engage customers to manage throughout this environment. All coming up on Automotive Insiders. Nick Ellis, it's a pleasure to have you on the program. Thanks for joining us.
Good afternoon, Jason.
And Vanessa Miller, welcome in to Automotive Insiders.
Thank you.
So we've titled it the Supplier Offensive Playbook, and we're going to talk about a couple of different facets related to contracts, tariffs, margin protection. Vanessa, let me begin with you. I know that you're well aware and monitoring this on a regular basis that pricing and cost pressures continue to percolate within the automotive industry. What are you seeing right now as we're one quarter into 2026?
Yeah, so for the last 5 years, frankly, we've been seeing this, that suppliers are really being hit from every angle. There's poor forecasting with respect to volumes, rising inputs on all fronts with respect to costs, labor pressure, energy spikes, freight volatility, and really just a constantly shifting tariff environment, which makes planning extremely difficult. So this kind of volatility that we're seeing and what the last 5 years have taught us is that this is not the exception. This is the operating environment that suppliers need to be prepared for. They need to be agile with respect to cost pressure and disruption.
And Nick, cost pressure is prevalent everywhere, increasing costs for material, labor, energy, transportation. And then you have tariffs on top of all of that. Can you talk a little bit about some of these disruptions and shortages that have occurred in that 5-year window?
Sure. I mean, think back in some ways to, I guess, what many people might think of now as the good old days pre-COVID. We had relatively low inflation, at least relatively predictable political and social environment that suppliers were dealing with. And you at the very least, you had predictability. Think about the structure of the automotive industry is most suppliers are on these long-term contracts, life of the program, 5, 7, 10 years. All of that worked very well when you had a predictable environment. You could price in a certain level of inflation each year, and more often than not, you'd probably get it right. Now, we are in a high inflation environment where suppliers are dealing with, what seems like a once in a lifetime event just about every other week. Wars in Ukraine, wars in Iran, closure of the Suez Canal, all of that. And it becomes very difficult for suppliers to plan for that on these types of long-term contracts that they're dealing with. And then you throw tariffs on top of that, where we have a supply chain that is global in nature. Most large automotive suppliers, particularly at the tier 1 level, are going to have operations across the globe, whether that's China, Europe. They're going to have sub-suppliers coming from those locations, Mexico, Canada, within North America. It really is a global industry. And that has been very reliant on low friction transition, low cost transition between countries. When you're getting parts from one country into another, you start throwing in these now significant tariffs that we're seeing, and it just throws the entire system out of balance.
And Vanessa, that's not even counting the semiconductor issues. It's sort of a, Nick said it best. There's one crisis after another. And when you're in an unprecedented period of volatility that's constant, how that relates to contracts that were even agreed to before all of this started becomes a complex matter, right?
Correct. So suppliers aren't just managing their costs anymore, they're managing chaos.
Right.
What used to be something that just the procurement team would be grappling with is now becoming a C-suite and boardroom issue entirely. So one of the biggest challenges is that you have suppliers that are tied to long-term fixed price contracts. And these were probably signed many times before 2020. The purchase orders were issued, the pricing was locked. And that was in a very different cost environment. And then you have situations where vehicle programs are continually extended by the OEMs, by the automakers. And that creates a really dangerous misalignment because you have 2026 volatility and everything you're dealing with being governed by pre-2020 cost walk and pricing logic, which is it's a misalignment, it's a mismatch, and it's difficult for the suppliers to navigate it. Um, the the question that they come to us with is what can we do? How can we get back to the commercial negotiation table to realign with our customers and with our own supply base as well, because they have their procurement teams that are managing their supply base. So looking at different ways to try and leverage the commercial negotiations to get back to talking about where things are in the market, what the realities are with respect to volumes, cost inputs, and what those suppliers are dealing with in their own supply base.
So what's your best advice, Vanessa?
My best advice is that the contract is probably one of the most underused tools with respect to protecting your margins. Although it doesn't give you a clear path to a price increase, that doesn't mean that there's no path forward to get back to the negotiation table. Look and see whether the contract really is fixed for the term, whether there are things that your customer needs from you, and how you can leverage that, because the customers are also asking a lot of suppliers right now. They're asking them to hold capacity even if volumes aren't there. They're asking them to bid on new programs and to take risks in maybe an uncertain EV program and make investments. So look at how you can have the give and take that makes contracting possible.
Nick?
And Jason, I'll put in a little plug here for the MEMA industry briefing coming up on May 13th. Vanessa and I are both going to be talking on some of these issues at that conference, and we're going to go through some of those contractual strategies, things suppliers can look for on both sides of the ledger, both when they're buyers and sellers. What are really the key things to look at, and what are the strategies that you can employ to try to manage some of these pricing challenges that everybody's dealing with?
Nick, when you think about the whipsaw effect as it relates to regulation, if you're a supplier, what's your best advice? I mean, as the regulatory environment continues to change, it could change again. Again, you both have highlighted the planning cycles that go into the industry and the kind of time that's baked in. What's the best advice for suppliers listening or who will attend on May 13th?
Like, I think Vanessa hit the nail on the head when she said you got to look at the contracts. When you're talking about existing contracts, you're obviously going to be limited by what's in there, but there are certain levers that you can look at, things that you can pull. When you're talking about future contracts that suppliers are negotiating now or maybe entering into in the future, well, you want to make sure you build in protections against at least some level of risk. It's not possible to understand everything that could happen in the future. If I had a crystal ball, I'd probably be a much richer man, but I don't. And so we just have to do, the best we can and try to build in that level of flexibility and risk allocation between the parties, if the unforeseen occurs and if there are changes in the regulatory environment. And at the end of the day, the contract is those risks do exist, and the contract is going to assign those to one party or the other. So you just need to make sure that you're going into it with eyes open in terms of where that risk lands.
Final thing to you, Vanessa. I know that the discussion will focus heavily around guidance, the one that you will have in the supplier offensive playbook session, but it also has to deal with strengthening the commercial position in what is an unpredictable market, controlling what you can control, right? And If suppliers are moving beyond defensive reactions to more strategic postures, what's your best advice there?
Yeah, there's two things I would like to see coming as lessons learned out of what we've seen in the last 6 years and even before that, frankly. What I would like to see is number one, I would like to see suppliers negotiating volume bands or volume parameters such that if a certain volume is hit, then that's the price that the customer has to pay. But if a volume is missed, and we're holding capacity and we've done all of these things to get ready for these volumes that were never realized, then we have to look at price increases. And it may just be that we have to go back to the negotiation table in good faith, or it could be that we have an agreed upon price at different volume bands. That's number one. Number two, I would like to see suppliers up front getting a promise that if they're not going to be able to amortize or be reimbursed for the investments they make upfront for these significant programs through volumes and through production parts, that then there will be a plan B with respect to recouping your CapEx, your investments, and all of the things that the suppliers are doing to get ready for a program that may never come to fruition.
Excellent. It is the Industry Briefing Market Strategy, Policy, and Innovation Outlook session on May 13th in Auburn Hills at the Marriott Pontiac. Nick, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And Vanessa, thank you for being on the program.
Thank you.
Big thanks to my guests again, Vanessa Miller and Nick Ellis of Foley and Lardner. Thank you for listening. Remember, there's a library of episodes on your favorite podcast platform. I'm your host, Jason Stein. We'll see you again next time.